What I'm still having a problem with is why my chateau, Chateau Fénelon here in Orgueil, has no history, and why was it written out of history? Now, like I said before, if you want to open an investigation, you have to have a good research question because curiosity is not enough. So I started to study the published history of Chateau de Fénelon, and I started to read the reviews that people had left online, mostly people questioning that the history doesn't match the building. And those online reviews left me with just as many questions for myself.
Here is a quick synopsis. Chateau de Fénelon was built in the 9th century on the site of a former Saracen fort. The chateau was ordered to be destroyed in 1241 by an Inquisition court as punishment for its owners, Almava, Seigneur de Salignac, and his wife, who had converted to Catharism, and also for giving refuge to other Cathars fleeing persecution. Also, as part of this punishment, Almava and his wife were sent to the Holy Lands for 3 years. The Salignac family rebuilt Fénelon shortly after their return from the Holy Lands, and around the year 1400, the Salignac family purchased Chateau de Fénelon.
Wait a minute. Let's go back to the start. Fénelon was destroyed in 1241 and then rebuilt in 1244 by the Salignacs, and then they bought Chateau de Fénelon in 1400. But when they rebuilt it in 1244, it was in the style of the 9th century.
This is not normal human behavior. Think about it. If a house is destroyed by war, fire, or whatever, normal human behavior would be to rebuild with the most modern building of its current period of time, not replace or rebuild in a style that is over 400 years in the past. Another thing that's strange is all the castles, chateaux, and towns that were associated with the Cathars were destroyed, and I mean completely destroyed. Just look at Montségur, Termes, Las Tours. These places were abandoned because it would have cost too much to rebuild. But also look at the towns of Béziers, Albi, and Carcassonne. They took years to rebuild as a group effort of the inhabitants. So why does Chateau de Fénelon not fall within the same category of suffering the same level of destruction as all the other chateaux and castles? And how did the Salignac family find the funds to rebuild Fénelon? If they were treated the same as the others who had converted, they would have had their property and fortune removed from them as part of their punishment.
But let's go back to that first part. The Salignacs purchased Chateau de Fénelon around the year 1400. Now, the documents say the Salignacs owned Fénelon in 1241, but they didn't purchase Chateau de Fénelon until 1400. How is this possible? And how can this be true? And how did the family get elevated to the rank of seigneur, lord, in the aristocracy? If you look at things from a different perspective, I do think Fénelon was completely destroyed. This band gives me all the information associated with this item. This band also gives me all the information associated with this item. But when you put the two next to each other, they're slightly different. And this is what I think has happened here. Two chateaux with the same name, both set in the same typography of the landscape, but one written out of history. And because academics have studied all the documents, they've made the error of applying all the information onto the wrong chateau, when in reality, the information should be divided between the two chateaux. And this is why I think it was Chateau Fénelon here in Orgueil that was ordered to be destroyed. I do not dispute the importance of Chateau Fénelon in Saint-Mandin. It stands as a significant place in French history, but I think it's part of a much greater history of France. And I think that historians have confused historical events and then associated those events with the wrong chateau because the other chateau has been written out of history. But why?
It was one afternoon I took a trip to the nearby town of Castelnau-d'Estrettevant. And while I was at the supermarket, I noticed the heraldic crest, or blason, of the town, and I noticed it was very similar to the one in Orgueil, and that of the Salignac family. So I started to research the blason of the local towns and noticed a significant amount of green and gold is in this area. Could this blason be the link to the rise in the status of the Salignac family and the aristocracy? I think I found a link that could be logical, and it all goes back to the year 1159. It is in this period of time the family begins being referred to as Seigneur de Salignac in the family tree. King Henry II of England was also Duke of Normandy, and from his birthright he had inherited Maine, Anjou, and Touraine. And when he married Eleanor of Aquitaine in 1152, the Duchy of Aquitaine came under his control. Now this marriage caused great tensions in Europe because Eleanor was previously married to Louis VII, King of France, and during that marriage the Duchy of Aquitaine had been under the control of Louis. Henry was eager to expand his territories in mainland Europe, and in 1159 he planned an attack on the city of Toulouse to try and take control of the county of Toulouse, which was under the control of Raymond V, who was married to Constance of France, Louis's sister. This marriage had been arranged by Louis in 1154 as a way of securing his southern borders. Henry set off from his seat in Poitiers, heading south, gathering troops and supporters along the way, where he stopped in Argens. He rallied more troops and followed the Garonne River and set up a garrison camp in Castelnau-d'Estrettevant. This is where I'm getting two conflicting stories. One says that Henry went to Villemur-sur-Tarn before the attack, and another says he came to Villemur-sur-Tarn after the attack. Either way, Henry did make a charter at Villemur-sur-Tarn in 1159. Now, I've yet to see a true account of this planned attack, but logic would tell me that Henry went to Villemur-sur-Tarn before the attack and gained support of the Salignac family with a promise to raise them in status in the aristocracy, and then together they marched down to Castelnau-d'Estrettevant, where the Salignac family were left in control of the garrison. This would be a logical explanation as to why the blason in Castelnau-d'Estrettevant is so similar to the one used by the Salignac family. The siege never took place. Unbeknown to Henry, Louis was already in Toulouse visiting his sister and brother-in-law Raymond. Henry was not prepared to attack Louis, as Louis was still Henry's feudal overlord in mainland Europe. The enraged Henry withdrew and remained content with seizing castles and ravaging the surrounding counties and taking the province of Quercy from the county of Toulouse. The first castle he took was at Castelnau-d'Estrettevant, where he left Thomas Becket, his chancellor, and it was Becket who then ordered the destruction of the castle in the town. This could be a logical reason for the rise of the Salignac family into the aristocracy. What I need to find is a copy or gain access to the charter made by Henry in Villemur-sur-Tarn. Also, I need to find a full account of what happened at Castelnau-d'Estrettefond and thereafter, because I did stumble on a map from around 1400 for the county of Quercy, and it's strange that the division of the county follows the river on the north side of the Tarn, and then at one point it passes down to the south side of the river and crosses then back up to the north side. And this crossover seems to match the areas occupied by the towns of Orgueil, Campsas, Neuic, and Le Terme. Sadly, I didn't save the map from my research file, and I've struggled ever since to find it again. Let's go forwards 80 years and to the puzzle of Fénelon being destroyed. The account of this event says that the chateau was ordered to be destroyed in 1241 due to the owners of the chateau having converted to Catharism, and they were then sent to the Holy Lands for 3 years as punishment. If you're not familiar with Catharism, then I'll leave a link in the comments so you can research this Gnostic group for yourself. But their beliefs were a threat to the Catholic Church, and Pope Innocent III ordered a crusade to convert or exterminate their followers. Today we refer to this as the Albigensian Crusade, which began around 1209, with the two main leaders being Philip II of France and Simon de Montfort, the 5th Earl of Leicester. This is where things can get a bit confusing, because Simon de Montfort died at the siege of Toulouse in 1218, but his campaign was continued by his second son, also called Simon, who later became the 6th Earl of Leicester, who was also at the siege of Toulouse. This crusade can be seen as the beginning of the many wars of religion across France for the next few centuries. So why were the Salignac families spared when so many were executed or gave their lives for their faith? And if you follow the genealogy of the male line down, why were the Salignac family not stripped of their title? Why was Fénelon not completely destroyed like all the other chateaux and castles and towns, making it impossible for them to be rebuilt? And where did the money come to rebuild Fénelon? And with so many more questions, I just decided to take a break and focus on something else. I decided to look at the floor plan of the chateau, because before you make any changes or renovations, it really is a good idea to know what you've got and what you can realistically change. And ever since I've entered this place, there was something that seemed familiar to me about the floor plan, and it reminded me of something I'd seen before, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. All houses evolve over time. They're modified to suit the owner's needs. The last major changes that happened at this chateau happened in the early 1960s, but I would like to make changes to better suit me and my way of living. While I was plotting out the rooms and then making a secondary copy of what I would like to do, which is mostly removing the modifications of the 1960s, I had a bit of a revelation. By removing the changes of the 20th century, I discovered the floor plan of the chateau is in the style of a 13th century manor house, seen in the areas of Essex and Kent, in England. How could this be possible? And why is this place such a puzzle? It is at this point I stopped researching for a few weeks, until one night when I couldn't get to sleep, I decided to look into the genealogy of the Salignac family. When you go back to the period of the 14th century and beyond, the names are not consistent. The dates are the same, but the names are different. Some places the name is Amalvin, and in other places the name is listed as Amory. I decided to look at the people involved around the time of the punishment, and I made a conscious decision to go with the names mentioned in the pieces written about Chateau de Fénelon. And I noticed that Amalvin's wife was known by 2 different first names, and I started to follow her genealogy. This is where I found out that her maiden name was de Ferrier, and she was the daughter of Guy William de Ferrier, the 4th Earl of Derby. And if you follow Anne's maternal line, you see that her mother was Agnes, and her mother was Bertrand de Montfort, the daughter of Simon de Montfort, the 5th Earl of Leicester, and the younger sister to Simon de Montfort, the 6th Earl of Leicester, who married Eleanor of England, daughter of John, King of England, and sister to Henry III. Could this be the link that explains why Amalva and Anne were not executed, and why their punishment was not as severe as others? And could it be that it was her family that helped her out with the funds to rebuild Fénelon? And could it be that it was her family that rebuilt Chateau Fénelon while she was away in the Holy Lands? The Earls of Derby were very wealthy and favourites of King John, and they retained many royal castles in England, some of those being Bolsover, Peak, and Horston. And they also had many properties around Bray in Berkshire, and the family also had significant lands in Essex. The de Montforts held the king's favour too, and they also had lands in Kent. Could this be the link as to why Chateau Fénelon in Orgueil is built to a floor plan that would be more commonly seen in England? If this is the link, it would mean that it is Chateau Fénelon here in Orgueil that was destroyed in 1241, and not, as thought and presumed, to be Chateau de Fénelon in Saint-Mandin, which the Salignac family didn't acquire until the year 1400. But we also have to compare the two buildings, one of stone, the other of brick. Stone is used to build defensive fortresses during periods of war. Brick is used during periods of peace. Building in stone can take many years to complete. Building in brick can take many months. Building something new in brick would be ideal for somebody returning from 3 years in the Holy Lands. There is more to this theory. At the time of the Norman conquest in 1066, the de Montforts and the de Ferriers were enemies, and although they supported William of Normandy in his fight to take the crown of England, their feud continued for many generations. By the time that King John took the throne in 1199, both families had become favourites of the king, and it seems the families had settled their differences. And then, a few years later, they'd become allies against King Henry III. Simon de Montfort arrived in the court of Henry III in 1236, and the two men became best of friends, so much so that de Montfort married Eleanor of England in 1238, the king's sister. So you would think that because of such a strong family connection to the King of England, that this would be the reason why the Inquisition were so lenient to the Salignacs of Fénelon with regard to their punishment. When Simon de Montfort married Eleanor of England in 1238, he was promised a large dowry, but he only received his title as Earl of Leicester, a small amount of money and some small gifts. And Eleanor brought with her to the marriage several manors, one of those being the manor at Sutton Balance in Kent. Today, we more commonly know this as the castle at Sutton Balance. So, because de Montfort didn't receive his large dowry as promised, he took out large loans against the name of the king. This infuriated Henry, and by 1239, de Montfort and Eleanor fled to France to avoid the king's wrath. It's also in 1239 that the Barons' Crusade in the Holy Lands began, and I find it strange that Simon de Montfort didn't take the opportunity to join them in this year. Instead, he joined the crusade in the autumn of 1241, the same time the Salignacs were being sent to the Holy Lands for punishment. Could it be that Simon de Montfort had the influence over the Inquisition court to spare the Salignacs? Could it be that it was Simon de Montfort who escorted his niece and nephew-in-law to the Holy Lands? Could it be that de Montfort set them up in the Holy Lands while the de Ferrier family rebuilt Chateau Fénelon in Orgueil? All of this needs further investigation. To me, this would make sense because when the Salignacs returned in 1244, they would have a new chateau and a new place to do business. And over the centuries, they could have been amassing the wealth to the point that they could have afforded to purchase Chateau Fénelon around the year 1400. With the knowledge that Chateau Fénelon in Orgueil was the place where Frédélon exchanged his captive, Bernard of Septimania, to Charles the Bald, and it was at Chateau de Fénelon where Frédélon was created the Count of Toulouse. They became the owners of the story and marked the event by changing their name to Salignac de Moth-Fénelon. But the question is still there. Why was Chateau Fénelon in Orgueil written out of history? My theory is this was done by François Fénelon. As I mentioned before, my research so far has shown me that François Fénelon never ventured further south than Gars during his lifetime. But that doesn't mean that it's not possible, or that he had family connections in the area. I did find in the archives in Montauban a mention of Anne de Salignac of Fénelon, asking for the return of a body of a fallen soldier for burial in the 1650s. Now, this date contradicts the current belief that the chateau was built in 1685. And I also ask the question, what is the Salignac family connection in this area? When Louis XIV introduced the Edict of Fontainebleau in October 1685, this made France a Catholic country, and the Catholic Church began a campaign to send great orators into the regions with the highest concentration of Protestants, to persuade them of their errors and erroneous beliefs. These Protestants had to either convert to Catholicism or leave, which many did, and many of these Protestants had their property taken away from them. François Fénelon was sent into the Saintonge on the far west. Bordelou was sent to the east of the Languedoc, and Esprit Fletcher was sent to the centre of the Languedoc, where he was elevated to become the Bishop of Lavaur. Now, Lavaur is less than 40 kilometres away from Chateau Fénelon here in Orgueil. That's less than a day's journey. If the Salignac de Moth-Fénelon family was so well known in the region, why wasn't François Fénelon sent to Lavaur? And the local history is that Chateau Fénelon was built for François Fénelon, but I don't find any evidence that he ever came here. François Fénelon was a favourite of King Louis XIV, and after 3 years in the Saintonge, in 1689, Fénelon was called back to Paris to become the tutor to the Dauphin's eldest child, the Duke of Burgundy, who was second in line to the throne. Through all my research, I see Fénelon as being a very respectful and, most of all, a kind and caring man. This is where my theory becomes divided. My first thought is that François Fénelon had Protestants in his family, or he knew of Protestants being persecuted and he was trying to help them. It was well known that he was born at Chateau de Fénelon, but not much was known about the lesser Chateau Fénelon in Orgueil. Having two chateaux with the same name, it would be easy to dismiss any reports coming across a desk of Protestantism going on at Chateau Fénelon as an act of sedition against the well-known Catholic bishop, François Fénelon, a favourite of King Louis XIV, who was elevated to become Archbishop of Cambrai in 1696. But things fell apart for François Fénelon, and he was removed from his position in court in 1697 after the Quietist controversy, which involved his cousin Jean-Marie Bouvier de la Mothe-Guillaume, more simply known as Madame Guillaume. And François Fénelon was relocated to Cambrai in the Hauts-de-France. I suspect that something was going on here at Chateau Fénelon in Orgueil, and whatever that was, it was uncovered, and then Chateau Fénelon here in Orgueil was confiscated by the crown, or the chateau could have been handed over to the crown as a way of a gift to avoid Francois Fénelon being punished or demoted. I do not know if those involved with the Quietist movement were punished the same as the Protestants. I cannot find that information at the moment, but I presume they were. The confiscation of property was a common practice, and then that property was sold on in the name of the crown. And I suspect that's what happened here, because in the very early 1700s, I see a new name in the archives linked to Chateau Fénelon here in Orgueil, and that family name being Desprats. And this family retained Chateau Fénelon right up until the 1930s. All of what I have previously mentioned has been gathered from all the threads of information that I have found. And those threads I've pieced together to make something that I think can be understood when you include this chateau into history. And I hope that I've asked enough questions to enable the opening of a new investigation into our understanding of events in the past. Sometimes you have to leave a theory out there in the hope that somebody might find it of interest and pick it up and do something with it. So I ask that you like, share, and subscribe to help me find the answers to all these questions. All of this needs further investigation. And if there was any subterfuge, I think it would be very difficult to find the information, as many of the documents would have been destroyed to hide the truth of what was really going on. But with the information I have, this theory to me seems logical. But who knows? There is more information out there somewhere, and somebody might find something that could completely change everything, which makes me cast doubt. So in the next video, I'll address that and say to myself, what if I'm wrong? If you have an interest in crafts, then why not take a moment to check out my website, where you can discover a whole range of needlepoint kits and cross-stitch patterns that have been inspired by my time living at Chateau Fénelon. The designs range from the traditional to the contemporary, in a variety of colors to suit your decor, and are designed for beginners and intermediates. The needlepoint kits comprise of a design that is printed on high-quality cotton mono canvas that has been cut big enough to fit comfortably into your own scroll frame, and the design is worked using 4-ply wool, which is also supplied in the kit, with 2 tapestry needles. Cross-stitch patterns are also available as PDF downloads. Keep checking the website from time to time, because as I get new samples completed, these designs will be available for purchase, and these purchases will help with the chateau restoration. Thank you.